The sun was burning high above the wide and lonely land. The wind carried dry dust that danced across the empty trail. Jake Lawson, a cowboy with a tired face and strong heart, rode through the desert with his horse, Dusty. His hat shaded his eyes, and his clothes were covered in the color of the land, brown, faded, and full of travel. Jake had been riding since sunrise, hoping to reach a small creek before evening. The Wild West was not kind to travelers. The sun burned, the nights froze, and the land was filled with hidden dangers. Jake knew all of this, but he had no choice. He was delivering a small leather pouch to a friend in a nearby town. Inside that pouch was a silver locket that once belonged to Jake's brother, the only thing he had left from his family. His brother had died years ago, and Jake had promised to return the locket to his friend Clara Whitmore, a nurse who had once saved his brother's life. The journey was quiet. The only sounds were the clopping of Dusty's hooves and the soft whistle of the wind. Jake stopped by a small group of rocks and let Dusty drink from a water skin. He knelt down to stretch his legs. That was when he heard it, a sound like dry leaves shaking. A warning sound. He turned his head slowly, and there it was. A rattlesnake coiled just a few feet away, its tongue flicking in and out. Jake froze. The snake struck before he could move. Pain shot through his leg like fire. He gasped and stumbled back, watching as the snake slithered away into the rocks. Jake fell to his knees, clutching his leg. The bite was above his knee, a dangerous spot. The venom was already spreading. His heart started to race. He tore off his bandana and tied it tight around his thigh. But his hands were shaking too much. His breath grew heavy and his head spun. He tried to get back on his horse, but his vision was blurring. The world looked like it was spinning in circles. He fell to the ground again, the sand hot against his face. He looked up at the sky, and it seemed too bright, too far away. He thought, so this is how it ends. Then, in the middle of the spinning world, he heard something. The distant sound of a horse. It was faint at first, then louder. A woman's voice called out, "Hey, can you hear me?" Through half-open eyes, Jake saw a figure riding toward him. It was a woman with a wide-brimmed hat, her long brown hair tied behind her neck. She jumped off her horse and ran to him. Her voice was calm but strong. "You're bit, aren't you?" Jake tried to speak, but his words were weak. "Snake, leg, it got me." The woman dropped to her knees beside him. "Don't you move. I'm Clara Whitmore. I know what to do." Her name hit his mind like a flash. Clara, the very same woman he had been riding to find. He wanted to tell her that, but he couldn't get the words out. Clara pulled a knife from her belt and cut the fabric of his trousers near the bite. She saw the 2 puncture marks, and he red and swelling fast. She quickly tied a strip of cloth above the bite to slow the poison. Then she looked him straight in the eyes. "This is going to hurt, cowboy," she said softly. "But it's the only way." Jake tried to protest, his voice barely a whisper. Don't do that. It's too dangerous," but Clara didn't listen. She pressed her lips to the wound and began to draw out the venom, spitting it away onto the ground. She did this again and again, her face pale but steady. The desert wind blew around them, and time seemed to stop. Jake wanted to tell her to stop, to save herself, but he couldn't even lift his hand. Finally, after what felt like forever, Clara leaned back, breathing heavily. She cleaned the wound with water from her canteen and poured a little whiskey over it to kill the infection. Jake groaned at the sting, but she said calmly, "You'll live. I think I got most of it out." She took a piece of cloth, soaked it with whiskey, and wrapped it tightly around his leg. Her hands were steady, even though her heart was racing. She had seen many men die from snake bites before, but she wasn't going to let that happen this time. Jake's breathing slowed. His face was pale, but he was alive. Clara looked around and saw his horse standing nearby, watching silently. She patted Dusty's neck and said, "Good boy. You stayed close." Then she dragged Jake's arm over her shoulder and helped him closer to the shade of a rock wall. The sun was starting to set now, turning the sky orange and gold. Clara built a small fire using dry twigs. She cooked a bit of beans from her pack and made Jake drink some water. He was half-conscious, whispering random words, his mind between dreams and pain. Clara sat beside him all night. Every few minutes she checked his breathing and felt his pulse. When he shivered, she put her blanket over him. She didn't sleep, afraid he might stop breathing if she closed her eyes. The stars came out bright and endless above them. The desert that looked cruel in the day now looked peaceful under the silver moonlight. Clara stared at the fire and whispered to herself, "You're not dying tonight, cowboy. Not after all this." Jake opened his eyes once in the middle of the night. His voice was weak, but he tried to smile. "You saved me," he said softly. Clara smiled back. "Don't thank me yet. You're still half dead." Jake chuckled faintly, which made her smile more. He looked at her, the firelight glowing in her eyes. She looked strong and kind, a woman who didn't run from hard things. Hours passed. Jake's fever rose and fell. Clara wiped his forehead with a wet cloth, whispering calm words whenever he groaned. The sound of coyotes howling in the distance echoed across the plains, but she didn't move. Her only focus was keeping Jake alive. When morning finally came, the first light painted the land gold again. Clara checked his leg. The swelling had stopped growing. The color was better. She breathed a sigh of relief. Jake opened his eyes fully this time. His voice was dry but stronger. "Guess I owe you my life," he said. Clara smiled. "You owe me a new dress. That one's ruined because of you." Jake laughed, weak but real. "Fair trade, I'd say." The wind blew softly around them. Clara helped him sit up and gave him a little more water. "You're lucky I was nearby," she said. "Another hour and you wouldn't have made it." Jake looked at her for a long moment. "Why were you out here alone?" Clara looked out toward the horizon. "I was traveling to Red Hollow, a small town that needs a nurse. People there have no one to help them. I couldn't turn my back on that." Jake nodded slowly. "The world could use more folks like you." The desert was quiet again. The danger had passed, but the moment had left something behind. A bond neither of them could explain. Clara didn't know who this cowboy really was, and Jake didn't yet tell her that she was the woman he had been searching for. It felt like fate had played a hand, bringing two lost souls together in the middle of nowhere. As the sun climbed higher, Clara packed her things. "We'll move when you can stand," she said. "There's a town not far from here. You'll rest there." Jake nodded, his eyes still on her face. He couldn't find the right words, but something deep inside him knew. This meeting wasn't just a chance. It was the start of something that would change his life forever. And as the day grew brighter, Clara smiled faintly and said, "Next time, cowboy, try not to pick a fight with a rattlesnake." Jake laughed softly, his voice still tired but filled with gratitude. "I'll keep that in mind, ma'am." The wind moved gently across the sand, carrying away the pain and leaving behind a story, one that would be told again and again under the starlit sky of the Wild West. The morning sun rose over the dusty hills, painting the desert gold once again. Jake Lawson opened his eyes slowly. The world felt clearer now. The pain in his leg was dull but not unbearable. For a moment he didn't remember where he was until he saw Clara Whitmore sitting near the fire. Her hair loose, her eyes half closed from staying awake all night. She noticed him stirring and smiled softly. "Well, look who's finally back among the living," Jake chuckled faintly. His throat was dry, but he managed a few words. "Still here, thanks to you." Clara poured him some water from her canteen. "You're lucky," she said. "Most folks don't walk away from a bite like that." Jake looked at her, truly seeing her this time. She wasn't just brave. She was gentle, too. Her hands looked tired, her dress was torn, and dust covered her boots. But to him, she looked like the strongest person he'd ever met. After a few minutes, she helped him sit up and checked his bandage. "The swelling's gone down," she said. "We can start moving soon, but slowly." Jake nodded. "Where are we headed?" "To Red Hollow," she replied. "It's a small town about half a day's ride from here. They need a nurse there. I was on my way when I found you." Jake tried to smile. "Guess fate didn't want you to arrive alone," Clara smirked. "Or maybe it didn't want you to die in the sand." They shared a small laugh. Then Clara packed her things and helped Jake onto his horse. She rode beside him, making sure he didn't fall. The sun climbed higher and the land stretched endlessly before them. Every few miles they stopped to rest. Clara gave him water and talked to keep his mind alert. She told stories of her life back east, how she had worked in a hospital during a fever outbreak, how she had lost friends but kept going because helping people gave her purpose. Jake listened quietly, admiring her strength. "Most folks would have gone home after that," he said. "I did," she answered softly. "But home didn't feel right anymore. Once you see people suffer and know you can help, you can't walk away from it." The words stayed in Jake's heart long after she said them. By sunset, they reached Red Hollow, a small town with a few wooden houses, a dusty main street, and an old church bell that hadn't rung in months. People stared as they rode in. A few came running when they saw Clara helping Jake off the horse. "Doc's away in the next county," someone said. "But Miss Whitmore, you came just in time." Clara nodded quickly. "Help me get him inside." They took Jake into a small cabin near the edge of town, the one meant to be Clara's home and clinic. She cleaned his wound again, changed the bandages, and made sure he rested. The people outside whispered about how she had saved a stranger from a snake bite out in the desert. By nightfall, Jake was resting on a small cot, watching Clara move around the room, arranging her medical tools and lighting a lantern. The soft glow filled the space, making it warm despite the desert chill. "You don't have to do all this," he said. Clara looked at him and smiled. "It's what I do." Days passed. Jake's leg grew stronger. He began helping around town, fixing fences, chopping wood, and keeping an eye on the small herd of cattle that wandered near the river. The townsfolk liked him. They called him Lucky Jake, because they all knew the story of how he survived the snake bite. But to Clara, he was just Jake, the quiet cowboy who always helped her carry water, who stayed up late fixing broken tools, and who always asked how she was doing before thinking of himself. One evening, while they sat outside watching the sunset, Clara asked, "Why were you out there in the desert alone that day?" Jake looked at the horizon for a long moment before answering. "I was looking for you." Clara blinked in surprise. "For me?" He nodded slowly. "I had something to return to you." He pulled the small leather pouch from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a silver locket, old but beautiful. Clara opened it and gasped softly. Inside was a tiny picture of a young man, the same man she had treated years ago during a town fire. "That's your brother," she whispered. Jake nodded. "He talked about you before he passed. Said you were the bravest person he'd ever met. I promised I'd bring this back to you one day." Tears filled Clara's eyes. She closed the locket gently and held it close to her heart. "I never thought I'd see this again." For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the grass. Then Clara looked at him, smiling through her tears. "Seems like we were meant to meet again, Jake." He smiled back. "I think so, too." After that day, their bond grew stronger. They worked side by side, helping the people of Red Hollow. Clara took care of the sick, and Jake made sure the town was safe from trouble. When supplies ran low, he rode out to nearby towns to bring back medicine and food. When she had long nights at the clinic, he stayed nearby just in case she needed help. One stormy night, a wagon broke down near the town. Jake rode out in the rain to help, while Clara prepared blankets and hot soup for the travelers. By the time Jake returned, soaked to the bone, Clara scolded him gently. "You're going to catch a cold doing things like that." He grinned. "Can't have people thinking the nurse's friend doesn't care about strangers." She shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You're impossible." He laughed softly. "You like that about me," and she did. Weeks turned into months. Red Hollow began to change. People started calling Clara the Angel of Red Hollow, and Jake became known as the Cowboy with the Lucky Leg. Together, they brought life back to a place that had almost been forgotten. One quiet evening, when the sky was pink and gold, Jake and Clara sat on the porch of the clinic. The town was calm, the children playing nearby, the smell of bread drifting from someone's kitchen. Jake looked at Clara, his eyes soft. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" she asked. "About staying," he said. "For good." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Staying here?" Jake nodded. "This town feels right. And I figure every good nurse needs someone to fix her fences and chase away the coyotes." Clara laughed quietly. "And what would you want in return, cowboy?" Jake smiled. "Just a place to belong." The wind blew gently through the open fields. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You already do." From that day on, Jake never left Red Hollow. He built a small home beside the clinic, and together, they made the town stronger than ever. The people admired their kindness and the quiet bond between them. Sometimes, when travelers passed through, they'd hear whispers about the story, how a cowboy once nearly died in the desert and a brave nurse saved his life. They'd say the two still watched over the town, like guardian spirits of the Wild West. Jake often joked that Clara had saved him twice, once from the snake, and once from the loneliness that used to live inside his heart. And every time he said it, Clara would smile and reply, "Guess we saved each other." Years later, when the land had changed and the West was no longer wild, old folks would still tell their story around campfires. They'd talk about the woman who rode through the desert to save a stranger, and the cowboy who found not just life but love because of her courage. And though time moved on, the wind that swept across the plains still carried their story, a tale of kindness, bravery, and how even in the harshest places, a good heart could turn danger into destiny.